What's up, guys? Welcome to another edition of Before the Whistle presented by BRK Insurance Group. If your business is looking for the best in employee benefits, commercial property and casualty insurance, or retirement and 401k plan services, there's no one better suited to meet your challenges and build a plan centered around your needs than BRK Insurance Group. What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to Before the Whistle. I'm your host, Maddy Hudak. I know I have been a little inconsistent, if you will, with the Tuesday and Wednesday releases of my show throughout spring camp. But just to be upfront with everyone, I was doing my taxes for most of the day on Monday. So at that point, I kind of wanted to also see what Tulane looked like after the second scrimmage. I think that I want to know a lot of things about this team, and I probably want more answers than you're able to get out of just an hour scrimmage, especially when you're in the middle of a quarterback competition and each guy is only getting such truncated reps. None of the quarterbacks really had that great of a showing this Saturday, but the highest amount of passes attempted was Ty Thompson with 10. The other two had 6 attempted passes each. So am I going to totally break down and pick apart some errors on just a small sample size? It's hard, at least for me to do, but you did also see just some errors and unforced things at that. And it wasn't really the first time that you've seen them, at least in the scrimmage setting. So at that point, I took my takeaways from this Saturday scrimmage and then really wanted to see that put into practice today and see what you could really gain out of that. And I'll be honest, it was a little sleepy for one reason or another at times. There were times where it definitely picked up, but especially in the goal line situation, you really were lacking intensity on both sides of the ball for that matter. So that was just a little disappointing and lacking in that matter. But you could also be seeing just the accumulation of 2 pretty hard-hitting scrimmages up to this point. We saw them again in pads, and it just really has stuck out that that's been a weekly basis thing, that they're in uniform pants at that. So disappointing in that aspect, that you wanted a little more intensity, and then you're looking at these guys at the quarterback role, and if anyone, they would be the ones you'd look to really be ramping up the intensity on the offensive side of the ball. But this quarterback competition, it's going to carry on into the fall. And it goes to show really just how many traits go into playing quarterback. So many of them on the field, but so many of them off the field for that matter too. And really just how rare it is to come across a totally well-rounded guy in the aspect that they did with Michael Pratt, kept him here for all those years, and we're able to see him relatively young at that. And that's, at least for me, why I've kept an open mind with this competition, because Michael Pratt was a true freshman when he came off the bench, and you just never know at the end of the day. To me, the defense is starting to pick up some swagger. The defensive line, you're starting to see, at least with respect to the interior, and you could feel good about one side of the ball with Angelo Anderson, Gerard Henderson, those guys getting some work, Michael Lunds, and Deshaun Batiste, as well as Matthew Fobbs-White. Those are all kind of those young guys that are stacking the days. You're starting to see these guys stack days at several different positions at this point. Linebacker has moved really fluidly at that. And you're, to me, starting to see some of that confidence and swagger necessary at defensive back, especially out of Lou Tillery. So I really liked what I saw out of the defense today, although in the goal line situation, they were lacking. But while they were lacking in play, I feel like you're getting a good sense of their identity. You're still kind of trying to figure out what it is on offense, but until you have a guy under center, it's going to be a little difficult to do. You're still trying to figure out the offensive line. We haven't seen the new transfer come in yet, but Trey Tuggle, who had been primarily playing there, has been hurt this week in practice. So it just goes to show how thin that room can really get you. But offense has a little bit more question marks. I think the wide receiver room is really starting to solidify itself. Shaz Preston is someone to me that has started to stack the days. Fat Watts just continues to impress me. Mario Williams, the breakaway speed that he has, get the ball to him. Get it to him in space. I just can't wait to really see how they stretch the field vertically with just his short area quickness. It's been really exciting to watch. The one thing I will say is special teams wise, you're probably not there with kicker yet either. I know that they have a guy coming in for fall camp, but it's just really given me an appreciation for guys like Valentino Ambrosio. And really how comforting it is to have such a surefire guy at kicker and one who can make it from, comfortably 40 yards out at that. But the defense to me has really made the biggest strides out of anyone. I thought the quarterbacks backslid a little bit on Saturday and then really didn't do that much for themselves today. But that was just kind of across the board. And I'm not in the business of picking apart really one practice, but it was one that I was looking forward to after this weekend scrimmage. Now I'm going to be looking forward to kind of what the response is this Thursday and heading into the spring game. Are these guys able to kind of pull it together and be that intense and really fight for these positions? And I think the spring game makes it a little more real, because after that, then you really have those conversations and learn where you stand on the depth chart. And so this is their last opportunity, but Thursday is their last practice. And practice is where teams are made, more so than scrimmages. So for me, I'm going to be really looking forward to seeing who steps up this Thursday. But there were some things that stood out today that were good, as well as this weekend's scrimmage, where, be it as you may, you still saw decent back and forth on both sides of the ball. And I'll break that all down on today's show. It's easy to hear a promo in the middle of a podcast and think, of course they like the product, they're paid too. Well, if you know me at all, then you know two things. One, I'm truthful, almost to a fault. And two, if I were in it for the money, I'd certainly be doing something else. So believe me when I say that I love Blue Oak Barbecue. The food, the drinks, the people, the location, yes, all of that. Blue Oak Barbecue has a great selection of your favorites, from the smoker, fantastic sides, and awesome bar specials each and every week. And we have something really exciting in the works coming out, I believe, next month there at Blue Oak from the drink category. But in the meantime, go check them out. Blue Oak Barbecue, located at 900 North Carrollton Avenue here in New Orleans, or visit them online at blueoakbarbecue.com. And back again to these April specials. Monday, you stick to your classic with your red beans and rice. You got a chicken mole on Tuesdays. That looks really delicious just based on that picture. And then you keep it simple on Wednesday with the house smoked turkey sandwich with guacamole, arugula, and killer wheat bread. And that is definitely something that I am looking forward to trying over at Blue Oak for sure. So go get yourself some specials. So I went into Saturday's scrimmage hoping for a little more answers at some of the positions for Tulane. And I think you're starting to see units form and kind of dance as a concerted unit. But in terms of some of the things I was looking for, particularly the quarterback competition, unfortunately, you really didn't see the needle move there that much. Neither of the two at the top of the race, if you will, and Kai Horton and Ty Thompson had a great day. It was a little more run heavy. It was a little shorter than last week's scrimmage. And for some reason, it just felt like neither of them could really get into a groove. And then you had some poor decision-making by both of them, with Kai Horton finishing 3 of 6, and he had 1 touchdown on his drives, and he threw just what looked like a really bad decision to Dixon Agu at linebacker. Ty Thompson was 4 of 10, and he also had a touchdown and an interception. And then you have Darian Mensah, who's the third guy in this race, who went 5 of 6. There's only so much that you can read into in terms of who's getting the first, second, third team rotations right now, because quite honestly, you're still trying to figure that out at a lot of different positions, and you're just going to see a little bit of rotation. And it's not, to me, really anything worth reading into. All things considered, this has been an interesting quarterback competition to cover, I guess. It sticks out that unlike the NFL, we have this time in the spring where you see things that are really new and really raw. And thinking back to the last quarterback competition that I covered again for the Saints, under Sean Payton with Jameis Winston and Taysom Hill, both of them had been on the Saints roster for years at that point, and were relatively used to the offense and the system that Sean Payton was going to run, both of them being on the team while Drew Brees was there and, after he ended up retiring. So it really is apples to oranges in terms of comparison, but even more so, even though Taysom Hill isn't necessarily your typical quarterback, he still had a lot of comfort and a lot of familiarity with Sean Payton's system, and so did Jameis Winston. So it was a little easier to just see them execute those types of throws and run the offense, and then be able to look at them a little more critically, or with a closer lens, if you will. Here, you have the experience with Kai Horton. It's not that much experience, but it's certainly enough that you really wouldn't want to see these types of errors in a scrimmage setting. And, that all said, it's not like Michael Pratt was always perfect in a scrimmage setting either, but you have a little bit of experience there. You don't have that much experience with him. And then Ty Thompson and Darian Mensah have zero. And all of them have zero time with John Summerall and with Coach Craddock at OC. So it's all a really new group of people. The offensive line has a ton of turnover. The center is a new guy for all three of these guys. The wide receiver room, I think you could say, is shaping out really well. And it's nice to see that is really, at least as up to now, as advertised from what we saw from the signing class and the transfer portal. And I think you're seeing those guys really start to solidify and battle those kind of third and fourth spot roles. And we haven't seen Keith Brown return to practice, but I don't really think you need to. I think that they're just not really going to rush him for what little is left in spring. We only have one more practice tomorrow, not tomorrow, on Thursday. Tomorrow after this episode comes out on Wednesday. And then we have the spring game on Saturday. So you're kind of winding up the end of spring, and you got a little bit of answers here and there. There's a lot of question marks this time last year on the Tulane roster, and you had a lot more surety at some of the roles, but the secondary was a little new. That being said, they had more experience on the secondary last year, but there were a lot of moving parts at that same time, and it didn't really look that pretty this time either. You didn't have that many guys transfer after the second portal open, but they had to replace Andre Sam at nickel. So that's where you saw Cam Pettislow come in. I know that the transfer portal opened up today. I know that John Summerall has been very open about needs at tackle, edge rusher, and cornerback. We'll see what kind of happens there, but you really need to get these guys in. It really was incredible what Cam Pettislow was able to do in just fall camp. In terms of learning the offense or the defense and being a starter and being as critical to that defense, to that secondary as he ended up being, that doesn't really grow on trees. So you can't really be looking for a savior in the transfer portal, but as we've seen, this might settle at some point. It might not. There's so many factors involved at this point, but it's hard for me to say that I'd rather have guys be stuck somewhere where they don't want to be for whatever reason or another, because you're just ultimately not getting the best out of that player on the field at that point. So whatever your feelings are about the transfer portal, I think that the amount of windows is a lot of windows. But at the end of the day, you rather guys that want to play for your school be on the roster, be on your team. And that's not necessarily always the case at the same time. They're going to have these exit meetings after spring practice where guys get a little bit of a reality check sometimes about what their situation is on the depth chart. And, let's say you're a guy on his last year of eligibility and you're not guaranteed meaningful playing time. It's hard for me to knock someone that's really wanting to go chase their dreams elsewhere. And, I'm just talking in hypotheticals now, but it does seem kind of ridiculous to have this conversation after everything that we've seen, all of the changes, and you finally really want to see things start to settle. So for this all to kind of pop up again, on the other side of the coin, Tulane has largely rebuilt through the transfer portal. We've seen a lot of promise out of the signing class, but a lot of the guys that we're talking about at wide receiver, at quarterback for that matter, most of the defense have been brought in addition-wise, except for cornerback, where you're seeing some of those younger guys get those opportunities. And this is not the first or second year that Tulane's benefited from the transfer portal, particularly on defense the last couple of years. So you get both sides of the coin with that, but we'll see how this week or next 15 days, I think, is really that portal window. But I really am looking forward to this Saturday. I think it'll just be really cool for fans that haven't seen this new team at all, really get a chance to see them play some football and get that feeling back on campus, especially again with everyone's last memories in Yulman Stadium being a little morose from last year. So really kind of wiping that slate clean, I think, will be really fun. It'll be fun for people, I think, to start to see the identity of this team. I just implore you to only take so much away from the game. I say, as I've been doing a podcast all year, but covering spring practice, there really is only so much you can gain from a scrimmage setting. You think back to playing sports. We played soccer scrimmages almost every single day. There's just no way, at least for me, that it's comparable to a game setting where you just get that feeling in you. People that played sports probably know what I'm talking about, and it's pretty simple. It's adrenaline. Obviously, you want that intensity in practice, and I will say today was a little disappointing for one reason or another. The goal line situation, no one was hitting hard. Don Summerall noted afterwards that it was soft and that he was really unhappy with it. He's very upfront with us when he's kind of displeased with these guys. But, then we had Jack Chinshu, one of the transfer safeties, come in and start talking about, or I believe it was Chris Rogers, who also spoke after Jack Chinshu, who, when asked by Gary Smith, I believe, about kind of what he wanted to follow in terms of following John Summerall and the staff over to Tulane. And immediately he said it's the high standard. It was so quick out of his mouth, and it was just so decisive in what he said that it really stuck with me. And it's something that I think we've all been able to see through the reports that have come out, through the way that he speaks with the media. It is just very candid and open with us, that he wants more out of these guys. And I don't think that you're going to get, at least at respect to quarterback, enough answers in 2 more practices to be able to, at least for me, give any type of evaluation, race, what have you. Obviously, I'm going to continue talking about it, and I'm going to look at that this Saturday, but I don't want to also pay attention to just quarterback at the detriment of the rest of the team, because might someone pull away on the spring game? Sure. But, then you have all of fall camp. So is one game going to really pull one of these guys one way or the other, when, at least to me, it's pretty dead even at this point? And I've heard the argument that, if you have 3 quarterbacks, you have no quarterback kind of thing. It's fair. That would be a fair thing to say if we were at the end of August and we were looking towards the regular season and there was no one really pulling away here. But this is just, you think about Ty Thompson and how he had to get some extra reps in because he had an off-season foot procedure. And so he's behind on learning this new offense, this new system, getting in a rhythm with these guys, getting those reps in. Their reps are just super critical. And there's only so many that you're going to be able to get up until this point of time. Something that I think has at least been lacking from these quarterbacks, and I think it might just be a byproduct of being in this type of competition, is just you're not really seeing anyone step up to the plate and be that leader. So, today when practice was really lagging, for example, you kind of want one of those guys to pull them all in and do get some intensity going. But you also, they're not the only guys on the team at the end of the day. And there's a lot on their shoulders right now. There's, I think, a lot of external, internal pressures, trying to get back to loving the game of football and Ty Thompson's perspective, while also trying to become the guy at the school and coming on the heels of Michael Pratt. It's easier said than done following up someone that changed school history in the way that Michael Pratt did. But a lot of this at this point is just accumulating information, and they're accumulating this information. All these other guys are too. But, when people are kind of slacking and that's a team-wide thing, it doesn't just have to kind of be the quarterback. So you're kind of waiting for those louder guys to emerge by the end of the practice. And he's so surefire in this aspect, but Tyler Grubbs really got out there and, he wasn't in for this rep, but really getting after the defense. I think the defense, to me, going back to this Saturday scrimmage, they've found their swagger a little bit. It's starting to click, and I think it's starting to slow down for a lot of these guys, especially Lou Tillery. He has stood out to me quite a bit in these last couple of practices. I think that in terms of development, those guys are still super young, but you've seen really good improvement from all of them at that position, if you ask me. You've seen Jai Eugene Jr. take really strong strides. You've seen Rishi Ratan make so many interceptions that today he was running with the ones. He's made some interceptions at camp over the last couple of seasons. There are guys that, perform stronger in a camp setting, and, for one reason or another, it doesn't translate onto the field. But I like that he was getting that shot today based on what he's been doing. I think he had another one today, if not very close to that. But these guys are very ball hockey in the secondary. And to me, his safety is pretty locked up, and that says a lot. Quarterback, that's one-on-one. You're looking for guys that they have those physical traits, they have the mental ability, but safety, you're really gluing everything together in the secondary, in the backfield. You have to be able to communicate and switch with your fellow safety and make assignments in coverage. There's a lot more put on their shoulders at the safety position. So thinking about this for me, if you reverse this and had experienced guys at corner, it would make things easy in terms of locking down receivers in man coverage, but you're leaving yourself really, really, really vulnerable to guys not understanding, what it's like when it's a split safety coverage, what they have to do when they're covering the middle of the field. And yeah, the cornerbacks have to know about that as well, but it's largely handling the assignment in front of them. The safety has to really watch everything unfold. You have the guy at strong safety who has a little more run responsibilities, the guy at free safety with a little bit of that range and roaming and being able to understand how routes change, how they declare and develop down the field. And so for me, the experience is critical at that position more than anything else. And Jalen Geiger just keeps sticking out to me because of his size, but him and Bailey Despaney really play as a unit at this point. And for that matter, Jack Chinchu is really equally in that race to me. You've seen mostly Jalen Geiger and Bailey Despaney with the ones, but, I saw Jack Chinchu and Jalen Geiger out there today. Bailey Despaney was, not participating in practice one day last week, I think. He played in the scrimmage this weekend, but you know what you have in him. You have a lot of experience and a lot of playmaking and that veteran ability in Bailey Despaney. But Jalen Geiger and Jack Chinchu have really made nice compliments. Jack Chinchu is a little scrappy to me. He's quick. He has a little bit of that twitch to him. But they're really starting to diagnose these plays. And for me, when those hits start stacking on defense and you start to kind of feel the violence, to be honest, that's where it really starts to ramp up for me. And I honestly think that it's good because I said this after the first scrimmage, I think. I'm trying to kind of assess when the wide receivers and defensive backs are so new to this team, but you have such little experience at defensive back. When we saw this offense of production in the first scrimmage, was that a byproduct a little bit of those corners lacking experience? You're not going to get all of that, with a week's time, although I do feel like you did see a little bit of that gear switch for those guys. That first scrimmage for Lou Tillery and Jai Eugene at corner was, really their first real scrimmage setting where they were running with the ones or the twos for that matter. Last year had such depth in the secondary that these guys just really weren't getting that many reps with the ones or the twos to be able to develop and start to kind of make those plays. But I've noticed that they're starting to make the plays. They're starting to get a little scrappier. Caleb Bransaw is another one too, where he has probably the most experience on the secondary right now outside of Bailey Despaney. Jalen Geiger, he comes over from Kentucky. Looking into his resume, he had a really impressive sophomore season. And then he beat out, for the starting free safety role in the 2022 season. And then 2 games into the year, he tore his patellar tendon, I want to say, in his knee. And that was at the end of it for the season. He comes back last year, gets injured in like week 3 of the season, and then kind of lost his way on the roster. So he's one of those perfect examples of someone in the transfer portal where they've just kind of fallen for one reason or another out as a shuffle. I talked about this when I wrote the article on Nick Anderson about him entering the draft and him going to Tulane instead of Ole Miss, and talking about my soccer experience and how I moved down for a little while to a lower level. I had gotten hurt. I hadn't really grown since middle school, and I kind of lost my spot on the roster. So I could have either wasted away sitting on the bench for a couple years, but being on a good team, or I could go be a leader somewhere, go develop myself, and then maybe make it back. I did, and then an injury took me out, but that really wasn't the point at that point. And that to me is the mentality of, I think, someone like that coming here to try to get that extra time in that starting role. And all things considered, he is been with the ones since we've started camp. But you feel good too about the fact that Jack Chinchu is versatile, and you saw them start to implement some dime packages today where he came in on that. And last year, Tulane used dime a lot. It was one of my favorite things as someone that enjoys the secondary, where, between AJ Hampton and Tahir Noor, they were able to really run some dime out there just in terms of what they were wanting to do and keep on the field at cornerback. But we haven't really seen that much of that this year. They're also getting to that point in the installs. It's really just a process in the spring. But to me, the defense won the day on Saturday, but you felt like the team is actually starting to get just an identity at this point. You're seeing them get a little chirpy. You're seeing guys that are, their time working has paid off, like Rishi Ratan, where, we'll see what he ends up playing this weekend. We'll see what ends up happening at that position. But he still, I think, have a transfer coming in at that role. But it just goes to show that they're awarding these guys that are putting in the effort and making the plays. And it really is just, there is something that John Summerall had said after one of the practices where, clout is earned on the field. It's not where you come from, what your ranking is. And you really do feel like that is the mentality here. Everywhere you look on the field, it really is just a mix of, you have a lineup of, a guy like Bryce Bohannon, who's been at Tulane for several seasons. And was he going to be the number one wide receiver for you? Not necessarily, and probably not at his size, but he's been on the team since the 2-10 year. He has experience in as many Tulane offenses as you could ask for, particularly time with Kai Horton and Darian Mensah. You have to think about a little bit of that edge going to those guys where there's not as many and all the starters are gone from last year. But with Kai and Darian also not being the starters of the team last year, they spent a little more time with these guys, except for Fat Watts, who was hurt. But getting off track, all that to say, I think it's wide open at most places. I think you can see a lot of answers. I've seen people asking about linebacker. It's one that I think the depth's a little concerning at. We don't know really the status of Jesus Machado's knee injury, but we haven't really gotten an update, and I don't know really what his return is at this point. And yeah, it's largely the same defense from what we've heard in terms of terminology and the same kind of 3-4 base from last season. So it's not like he's having to learn a new system like we're seeing on offense, but you also have to kind of keep going. And we've seen pretty much most of the time Dixon Agu opposite Tyler Grubbs. I think they brought in Chris Rogers from Troy at linebacker a few times. We've seen Mekhi Williams come in a couple times as well, but largely that's kind of your 1-2. And both of them have really been making plays and working together as a unit together. And it's just really been to the point that I haven't paid that much attention to that level of the defense because it's really just kind of worked fine. It's one that you feel solid about despite not having that much depth at it, because that all said, if Tyler Grubbs goes down, that's a huge problem for Tulane. If Dixon Agu goes down for Tulane, that's also a problem for them at this point. You lost Jared Small to the transfer portal, and you lost Corey Platt as well. And so really what was looking to be an intriguing, unproven, yet kind of stacked room last year is really quickly whittled down. But for now, it has really kind of worked out fine. Defensive line too, I think you're starting to see some guys really start to get some work in. Donis Freelu has always been a guy I've been interested in watching. Just his size alone draws me to him, but he's been hurt for most of the last 2 seasons. He's been someone that I've paid a lot of attention to in camp. It just allows Tulane to do a lot when you have a guy that has that size on him and is really able to anchor down the team as a true nose tackle, take on those double teams. I noticed today that someone that I had wanted to look at in their usage was Patrick Jenkins, because the first scrimmage, we saw him at edge. Angelo Anderson was also injured at that point. And then this last week of practice, we saw him, or the week after the first scrimmage, we saw him back at defensive tackle, and then same goes in the scrimmage. Today, I did see him a little bit at edge. So it caught my eye. It's something that I think is worth paying attention to. But, guys like Eric Hicks, Deshaun Batiste, we pull up who was on that first team. Gerard Henderson got some time. We've seen Parker Peterson get a lot of time too in the center, and then Angelo Anderson as well. But between Eric Hicks, Adonis Freelu, and I'm blanking in real time, guys. Eric Hicks, Adonis Freelu, and Patrick Jenkins, I'm sorry. You can feel pretty good about the majority of Tulane's defensive line. Cam Hamilton has been hurt throughout spring, so we haven't really seen him as well, but you're still looking for a little bit of that production at edge. It'll be one that I'll be curious to see how that develops throughout the rest of, I guess just Thursday and Saturday at this point. But these are all really just storylines to keep looking at and following into camp. We could see some additions on in the transfer portal. We could see some losses. We don't know, such as the, beauty of this era of college football. But something you can feel really good about is the running back room. Doesn't need to be said, but Mekhi Hughes is really that dude, and he looks just that much faster this year. One of the touchdowns on the day was this breakaway run by Mekhi Hughes to start the day on Kai Horton's opening series, and he just blew past the defense, and it was really just goodbye. And yeah, it's not game speed at this point, but you could tell that he just picked up a little bit of that extra gear. And there was a few plays last year where, if he just had a hair more speed on him in his long speed, then probably a breakaway for a touchdown. But you can really feel confident in that room. Arnold Barnes just continues to impress. Really what they're using them as receivers as well, just as much. Today, you saw a little bit of them using 2 running backs in an offset I formation. That was really interesting to see. It's been creative and it's been interesting to watch every single day of practice. But you're also kind of seeing just the natural ebbs, flows, and momentum of life, but of spring practice, where you're still in the basics. You're still learning a lot of new things, and there's a lot of new things to cover here at Tulane at spring in a way that we're really not used to seeing here. Whereas fall camp, you'll start to get a little more answers. But the spring game this weekend, I think, is just that one last opportunity for guys to change their story heading into spring. There very well could be guys, let's say they're a little bit on the fringe and they check out on Saturday. They don't throw a block when they're at wide receiver when they should. Or conversely, they end up changing their story by performing really well this weekend. After the first scrimmage, once guys start to make plays, you see the offense start to play together and really be excited for everyone making plays as much as themselves. Same goes on defense. And now that they've started to kind of affect these quarterbacks, rattle them a little in these scrimmages and get some takeaways, that builds confidence for that side in a way that is really important, especially when you're looking at the lack of experience and age there. You don't want unjustified confidence, but it's kind of the necessity, especially of that secondary role. But it's just the mentality of playing defense. And they, to me, just had the better day of the two this last weekend. But today on Tuesday, everyone was kind of asleep at the wheel to an extent. There was competition here and there throughout the day, but as I said, there were some periods where just the physicality and the mentals were lacking. That's just kind of life sometimes. You're not going to have perfect practices every single day. And as I said, I never really took this close of stock in previous spring practices on a daily basis, just by product of not needing to know that much information. But I'm not going to act like every day of Tulane spring practice has been sunshine and rainbows since I've been the sideline reporter. But today was definitely the most lethargic that we've seen. They also, even though they were blowing the whistle early on some tackles this weekend, these guys have really been hitting each other, and it's probably just starting to wear on them a little bit. But I'll be curious to see how they respond on Thursday. John Summerall talked to them for a pretty long time after practice. Didn't seem thrilled when he blew the whistle on the day, and then told us just as much to the media after practice. So, who's going to be the guy that steps up on both sides of the ball for that matter? You're really kind of wanting that to happen at quarterback, but you're probably not going to see that happen enough going in the last couple of days. But that to me is going to be the number one thing I'm looking for in the first week of this upcoming training camp for them in the fall is who made the biggest jump as a leader in that position group. But you need leaders on both sides of the ball. You lost a ton of them in so many positions. I've gone over this ad nauseum on this show, but it really is true just how many new faces there are here. And I don't know, what these guys are like at their old schools. Even if you were a leader at your old school, sometimes you're kind of trying to find your way. Don't want to step on people's toes here and there, but someone does kind of need to grab the leadership by the horns. So you saw Tyler Grubbs do it a little bit at the end of practice, but as Summerall put it at the end of practice today, the good teams are coach-led, but the really good ones, you have to be player-led. And that could not have rang more true or resonated more, I think, with Tulane fans than anything else. Thinking back to one of the big factors in the 2-10 to 12-2 turnaround was all of those captains getting together, calling that meeting, making people accountable, and really forming this player-led team. And you saw it happen after the Georgia Tech, Willie Fritz rumors, that Cotton Bowl year, the players held a meeting. You have lost all of those leaders, but it is true. Player-led teams are the ones that are really going to get you through the hard times at the end of the day. So you're looking for those leaders, but it's an opportunity. To me, it's kind of fun when something like that is so wide open. Because once the guys start to feel a little more confident in their roles and you get some semblance of a depth chart, then you can kind of take on those leadership roles a little more. But you really just need a little bit more answers, even though you could also argue that these guys have been here before. They've all played football. They should be able to kind of figure this out. But such is life. And we're seeing just a little bit of a lack of leadership in a practice setting. You're seeing the intensity ramp up quite a bit more in the scrimmages. And I think the spring game, you're really going to see some competition because, again, these guys are just fighting for roster spots and looking at whether or not they're going to stay at Tulane or if they're going to transfer elsewhere, what have you. So that'll be what they're really playing for this weekend. But I really do think you'll get a good snapshot of the identity of this team and the building blocks of what I think is going to be a really good team heading into the fall. But that is just what it is at this point, is the building blocks. You can't build Rome in a day. You can't force things to develop at a quicker pace. There's only so many practices you're allowed to have. And I'm sure every coach wants way more time out there on the field, especially at this point in the offseason. But it's not like they're going to go to sleep for the summer. We're just not going to really be covering that in, this type of setting. But you'll think you'll really get finally some answers just depth chart wise in this spring game where you can build on these guys 1, 2, 3 games at this point, comfortably heading into fall camp, save for, additions or losses on the transfer portal. And then you can kind of start breaking down those groups. But as I keep saying, as a sideline reporter, I'm looking at the team from an on-field basis, but I'm also looking at it from an off-field basis as well, especially because I'm going to be spending a lot of time with all these guys on the sideline. I'm going to be poking my head in meetings, seeing who takes guys aside, who holds guys accountable, who steps up. And it's fun to kind of be looking forward to seeing who that is. I think that it'll happen eventually. I'll be curious to see what the bounce back is this Thursday, but if you're looking for a perfect practice every single day, you're probably not going to get one. But you probably wanted a little more intensity out at the end of the day. You're allowed to be disappointed in some practices, but I do just want to say again, 3 practices a week. You have this huge spring break chunk in the middle of it. It just lacks the same level of intensity as fall camp. And you're also just don't have the impending games. And I'm not going to sit here and act like I didn't just do my taxes yesterday when they were due, and that I don't thrive on procrastination and the adrenaline and consequences of the impending doom of not getting to my mistake. I don't think that's how football teams should operate, but all that to say, I do at least understand it on a mental level where things just start to become more real as you go on. But if nothing else, it's really just shown me how invaluable guys like Michael Pratt, Nick Anderson, Tajay Spears, Sincere Haynesworth, Jarius Monroe, Lance Robinson have all been to this team, and you can't just grow leaders on trees. So when you're trying to solve both player and leader problems, you need both of them, but you need at least one of those to take hold. And most of the time, you need it to be the player and then become the leader rather than the other way around. So we're seeing these guys start to form identities. We're seeing guys start to get competitive and chirpy and at least start to feel like they're a starter or they're fighting for that backup role. And we'll see what happens this Saturday. But I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be different than what we've seen previous years in the spring game where they drafted these 2 teams, if you will. Whereas we're just going to see ones versus ones, often same thing that we've really been doing in these scrimmages. We just don't have enough guys to split it up into 2 separate teams at this point when we don't really have a 3-deep roster. So the defense will have opportunities to score points on 3 and outs. Anytime they get a stop will be a point. And I think that's just kind of fun. It doesn't need to be that serious. Again, it's a spring game, and it's really, you're trying to get answers out of your guys and run plays and get them competitive and get them going. And so I think having the defense be able to really fight back and forth and give some pressure to these quarterbacks, we're going to see them operate with the clock, in the final 5 minutes of each half, I guess, of whatever you have this. So guys might have that opportunity for the 2-minute situation. But the way that he said it implied that if they haven't really gotten themselves there and situationally it's not there, then they're treating this like a real game. So maybe they'll kind of arbitrarily run some 2-minute stuff, but we might just really see it finally go back and forth. So can the side of the ball build momentum? The quarterbacks that have made these bad decisions in these past scrimmages, are they able to learn from them? Are they able to at least have a short-term memory and keep going out there and keep driving the ball downfield? Are they Are they seeking feedback on the sideline and receiving that feedback well? It's just as important to me as the decisions you make, at least at this point. But again, just showing some learning off of some last week's errors would be really good for them. But just seeing who wins at the end of the day and what that really says about each side of the ball. I just have felt like these past spring games, I can only surmise so much when Michael Pratt's getting snapped to by the backup center. It just, from an outsider's role, it makes more sense to me to play your ones against your ones and really see what you have at each one of those positions. So for that reason, I'm really excited for this Saturday, but more excited than anything else to just kind of get back down on the sideline, see how this team really runs with tempo and ferocity, and seeing what I think will be a really strong turnout from Tulane fans. Everyone's been so invested, and I really appreciate, again, everyone following along with this podcast. And I just hope that I continue to bring insights here on Before the Whistle, and I'm really looking forward to covering this weekend's scrimmage. So with that, y'all, I will see you for Friday's episode.